SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music. Morning there, Rhino.
Howdy.
All right, we're all buckled in, ready to crank up a brand new week here on MidDays. And lawmakers, they had to work a little OT over the weekend. I know you feel sorry for them.
Sorry for them.
Oh, my gosh. Trying to hammer out a budget. They got that done last night, $7.4 billion. And they say they think they're out of here this week. They're going to call it the old sine die and put the bow on the 2026 session. Following is a list of all of the legislation, the key, high-profile, meaningful, impactful legislation that was enacted. What the heck they been doing down there? Man, oh man. But the big thing is the budget, $7.36 billion to be exact. By the way, that's a bit of an increase over the prior year, about $225 million, 3% increase. So I'll just put it this way. If you wanted your government to cut spending, that did not happen. And when you're doling out teacher pay raises, and that's not saying that that wasn't warranted, but the fact is it costs money. You're doing that. Medicaid says we got to have more money to meet our obligation in the jointly funded with the federal government program. And then you've got just natural inflation. All of that's going on. And by the way, when you take education, inflation, Medicaid, next corrections, that's 3/4 or more of the state budget. So when that's going up, it pretty much means the total overall budget's going up. Now, I think most people would say, isn't there some other place, some place within the budget that we could reduce outlays to offset what is believed to be warranted increases, such as teacher pay raises? Now, I believe the market dictates that, and I would say right now we're at a dynamic with respect to the market where Mississippi lags in teacher pay. However, what was it, 2 years ago, Rhino, 3 years ago, we bumped teacher pay. But, of course, the other states respond. They're not sitting on their laurels. Teachers in short supply. Mississippi has a number of openings. I would say those market conditions justify it. On the other hand, we would be remiss if we didn't point out that it's been a long time since other government employees, talking about in the state government specifically, have had any sort of raise. Some have told me it's been a decade that unless you move up in the in the personnel stack, the way it works, really don't get any sort of raise. So that's where we are in the state of Mississippi with respect to this budget. So the thing about the teacher pay raise is that it came in lower than previously floated, is the way I'll put it. You remember the process, Rhino? Make sure I get this right. Right off the bat, the state Senate comes out and says, $2,000 pay raise. That happened day 2 or something of the legislative session. Meanwhile, the House has HB 2, the measure that would have implemented a fairly robust education freedom program. It incorporated a $5,000 teacher pay raise. By the way, also included increase in pay for teachers' assistants and those who teach special ed and so forth. Little bump for them on top of that. And then the Senate says, wait a second, hold my beer, not so fast there, House. We're going to do $6,000 in $2,000 increments over 3 years. Am I right so far, Rhino? Your understanding of it?
That sounds right, yeah.
It seems like the thing's been going on for years, so I'm having a hard time recalling. I think I'm pretty close here, if not precise. But then over the weekend, they started looking at the budget. And they said, uh-oh, that looks like that's going to cost more than we can afford. Meaning, afford in this case, meaning relative to the amount of revenue collected by the state. And the state does not desire to borrow money to balance the budget, which it must do. It is required to do. So we ended up with a $2,000 pay raise. We're back to where we were at the beginning of the session, consistent with the Senate's original proposal. Here's what I would say about...
it was $2,000, $5,000 with an extra $3,000 for special education.
Okay.
Then $6,000 with $2,000 raises over 3 years, plus $1,000 a year or more for special ed.
Okay, I had it right. So originally Senate says $2,000. House comes back and says $5,000 immediately, right? Both of those scenarios were immediate. In other words, effective now, not phased in. The Senate responds and says, let's do $2,000 a year for 3 years. Correct?
With $1,000 a year more for special ed teachers.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so, and where we settled was
$2,000 across the board.
Right, immediately. Correct. So that was the way the old sausage is made. Now, human behavior is something that must always be taken into account when making policy, implementing process, rules, and certainly making law is no exception. But it's really risky to go out and make proposals that affect someone's pocketbook directly and not be able to follow through. And that's kind of what happened here. We literally did a 360. And I think that many teachers across the state, when they saw the House's proposal for a $5,000 increase and then the Senate responding, albeit embedded in the Education Freedom Bill, which many teachers oppose. And, of course, the House was accused of, well, you're putting a poison pill in there. You're basically holding the teacher pay raise hostage to get your desire to implement a school choice program implemented in the state. Okay, you could certainly contend that with some degree of reasonable thought. And then the Senate comes back and says, well, we're not going to pass your school choice bill. 84 seconds it was disposed of. But they did come back with a separate measure to increase teacher pay. And it was clever. Hey, you guys had 5,000. We originally had 2. We're coming back with 6, but over 3 years. Phased in over 3 years. Here we go, House. Take that one up. Let's get it done. But the House, at that point, said, no, we're not gonna pass your measure. And then they got to looking at the numbers. And what I mean by that is all the agencies put forth their requested budgets, and lawmakers have to process and consider that. And here's what happened. They looked at Medicaid, which ran a deficit last year. They had to go back and fund that deficit for last year. And Medicaid said, by the way, we need a bunch more money in the next year than we got last year to meet our obligation. You got that going on. You got the need to inject money into PERS, although that doesn't come out of the general fund. The bottom line is there are pressures on the general fund budget that I think cause the legislature to implement and act on a $2,000 raise, and teachers are not too happy about it. Coming right back, Secretary of State Michael Watson at 10:35.
Hello, I'm Gary.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Now back to Middays with Gerard here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays for the Monday of this week. Just getting it kicked off from the Element Wealth Studio. Mississippi Secretary of State will join Middays in the next segment. Share his thoughts. Will Secretary Michael Watson on this legislation that would impose some requirements on the secretary to ensure that Mississippi's voter rolls only contain legal American citizens. That would be some processes implemented as part of the initial application process, application to vote, as part of the registration process. And then there would be ongoing analyses of the statewide election management system against the federal SAVE database. Let's see, I think that stands for Systemic Alien Verification for Entitlements. That's the name of the database in the federal cloud, if you will, that the secretary could access to determine if anyone on our rolls is also listed in that system as illegal, or their citizenship status is one that could be legal but not a citizen. Legal immigrants, those that have been granted such status under our law, are not eligible to vote. They're just eligible to be in the country. Illegal immigrants clearly aren't eligible to vote and not even eligible to be here under our law. They're here illegally. So this particular measure is a microcosm, if you will, of the Federal SAVE Act, not to be confused with the SAVE database. Who are the geniuses that came up with using the same acronym there? I know for that one, because it is confusing, no doubt. But we're going to talk to the Secretary about that. And also there's a big Supreme Court case involving the state of Mississippi. And it deals with whether or not ballots received after Election Day, though postmarked if they came in through the mail on Election Day, can be considered. We have a 5-day period, I believe. There's a couple of states even have longer than that. And so we'll get the Secretary's thoughts on that. Ben from Madison on the C Spire text line, that's 601-879-4395, says, got back over the weekend, happy to be home, still catching up with things. I recently read where the Medicaid budget has increased over $300 million per year. Yikes, do we know where that will put us as far as surplus? Well, both good questions. And I've looked at the actual detailed spreadsheets here, Rhino. There you go, little bitty writing there and a bunch of columns. I don't think it's $300 million this particular year. It looks like it's, $200 million, roughly. Actually, $170 million. $170 million is what I'm seeing. That's based on the final action in the proposal. So, but still, significant increase. And what it does do is put our Medicaid budget now for fiscal year 2027 north of $1 billion. It went from $1.4 billion to $1.170 billion. And that represents $165 million increase, or 16%. And the only reason it eclipsed the $1 billion mark for last year, because that's not the way it was appropriated, is because Medicaid actually ran a deficit. And you know how that process works, Rhino. You don't. We talked about it the other day. That's the agency that you can't precisely budget, because there is an obligation on the part of the states that is, of course, matched with the federal dollars to fund Medicaid programs, but you're estimating what that's going to cost at the beginning of the year. You can't predict what sort of health claims you're going to have, and so when those exceed predictions, you end up with a deficit situation. You didn't appropriate enough money to cover the cost of Medicaid services. That's exactly what happened. Thus, we ran a deficit. That put us over the $1 billion mark for the first time. Fiscal year 2026 did in the Medicaid program in Mississippi. It was about $950 million prior to that. So we ran a deficit, and you had to go back and appropriate money now to cover that deficit. Then, of course, you've got to look forward to the next fiscal year, 2027, and that comes in at $165 million, more than the reappropriated Medicaid. That's where we are. So, it's not quite 300, Ben, but it probably will be next year, based on what I'm hearing that Medicaid is informing lawmakers. By the way, this is going on across the country. This isn't unique to the state of Mississippi. And it's also true that in the state of Mississippi, much like all the other states, it's typically the number 2 spending object in a general fund budget, second only to education. Education, the principal budgetary function of state general funds, Medicaid right behind it, corrections right behind it. I'm not sure if that's consistent, the corrections piece being third in our state with the rest of the states. I don't know. But nonetheless, education, Medicaid, you could look at all of them, and that's what you'll see. Those consume a significant part of the budget. So in our case, just doing the math in my head, about 67, 68%, nearly 70% of our budget. Once you add Medicaid, it's about 80 to 83% of our budget comes from those 3 areas. Ben goes on to say, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but it seems like the phasing out of the income tax will likely be looked at, in quotes, again in the next legislative term. The math isn't mathing, as they say. Hope I'm wrong. Well, keep this in mind. We are phasing it out very incrementally, beginning in the next calendar year 2027. We got a quarter point that we will realize. reduction in the rate from 4 to 3.25, 3.75, pardon me. And then we go to 3.5 in 29 and 3.25 in 30 and then 3. So at that point, then further reductions, as you recall, would be implemented based on achievement of certain triggers. However, because of the drafting error in the legislation last year, those triggers will likely easily be satisfied, and thus the incremental reduction would occur. Maximum, as I recall, is 0.3%. That's right, because we're headed for a 3% terminal rate from the current 4%. That would be over the next 3 years, and then 0.3% per year over 10 down to 0. But, yeah, we're keeping an eye, to your point, Ben, on how that will affect income tax revenues, which account for about 28% of general fund revenues. 38% comes from sales taxes in the state of Mississippi. The theory is reducing the income tax is going to boost economic growth and increase our population, and that all you guys out there with this more money in your pocket from paying less income taxes are going to spend it, and that's going to generate more sales taxes to offset. Paint me skeptical on that. I don't see that happening, and here's why. That $2.2 billion of income taxes that would be phased out, now I get it, it's over a period of time. If you looked at the relationship as a percentage of sales taxes to GDP, what it essentially means is that if you're talking that if you believe that economic growth would offset the elimination of income taxes, we would need to increase our GDP by about $100 billion. Our state currently generates about $155 billion of GDP. That is a tall order, no doubt about it. But there's some other mechanisms with respect to our rainy day fund being flush as well before we can incrementally reduce the income tax. But just going from 4 to 3 could be problematic with expenses going up at a faster rate. Coming right back with Secretary of State Michael Watson.
From the Seabrook.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert, here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. It's a Monday. That means it's a short show. Ricky Matthews, Super Talk Outdoors, comes your way at 12:05. But right now, it's the Secretary of State of the great state of Mississippi, Mr. Secretary Michael Watson. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Appreciate what you do.
You bet, buddy, and you too. So let's talk about this legislation authored by Senator Jeremy England in the Mississippi State Senate that would just require the state of Mississippi, and including the Secretary of State of Mississippi, more importantly, to follow some measures just to ensure that our voter rolls do not contain individuals that are not valid, legitimate, validated American citizens. I want to be emphatic about that because this is pretty straightforward. And I'll preface it with this, and I'll shut up and let you talk. I got into a little social media spar with the liberals who just can put up more crazy stuff about why this is bad. And they get into you got this driver's license, a special enhanced driver's license. Yeah, but those aren't available in every state. And many states, as you know, actually do allow illegals to obtain driver's licenses. So that is not an absolute verification of their citizenship. And then they get into all the amendments in the Constitution that guarantee our right to vote. Well, yeah, but shouldn't we respect the Constitution by ensuring that the people who are registered to vote and able to cast ballots are citizens? Because when I checked it, Mr. Secretary, it explicitly says citizens in all those amendments. It's disrespectful to the Constitution for us not to take appropriate measures to ensure our rolls are clean. You got it.
You drilled it, my friend. And just imagine there probably are some folks out there that don't have a driver's license. So they go register with their utility bills, et cetera. That is what the SHIELD Act is actually going to do a really good job of catching on our end. So currently the system is, if you register to vote, your information is screened through DPS Verify is what it's called. And so a few different databases, including SAVAC, those types of information that are very helpful in determining whether or not you're a citizen. Well, if it flags that says this person may not be a citizen, then they have to come in within 30 days after giving notice from the circuit clerk to prove their citizenship. Well, the problem is if you don't have a driver's license, you're probably not going to be in the DPS system. So this is one that says, hey, if there's no flag and you're not in the system, we're going to check you anyway. I think that's a common sense measure that really applies across the board, so there is no gap anymore. The second most important piece to me is, and this may be even more important than the first, we get the opportunity now yearly to check against a saved verification system. We talked about this on the radio show quite a while back where we did it once after the legislature gave us a year to do it. Well, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to do that under law. I've been talking to the White House. As a matter of fact, we had a call, I guess about a week or so ago with the DOJ asking us where we were on using the saved verification system. I said, look, I can't do it. Now there's legislation that's coming that's going to allow me to do it. But currently, as law sits in Mississippi, I cannot use the saved verification system. So that's why this, in my opinion, those two issues right there are the most important things that I think. Number one, it closes gaps. Number two, allows us to check the saved verification system on an annual basis. I think that's really important. So a couple more days for the governor to sign it. My hope is that he will sign it. It goes into law, but really excited about this for the Secretary of State's office.
You and I talked a little bit about this offline, but I'm just going to speak from a business person's perspective, and you too, is the manager, if you will, of your office. It seems crazy to me that you would charge someone in your organization. In this case, the state charges the Secretary of State with administering properly and validated voter rolls, but not give you the tools and the authority to do that we have to pass law to do that. And so I'm glad that we're doing that, but it just seems like that there's a gap there. You got to do this, Mr. Secretary. You got to make sure that our voter rolls are solid and only include legitimate American citizens, but you can't do anything to make sure that that's the case. That doesn't make any sense to me.
You're right, Jordan. I think one of the most important pieces here to kind of take apart is that's why it's really important to have a conservative who understands what the law is and how to apply the law in state elected office. Now, look, I represent all Mississippi. I don't care if you're conservative or Democrat, independent, whatever, whoever you are. I'm going to represent you and I'm going to do it fairly. That said, I'm going to follow the law. And as we take apart what's going on inside the Secretary of State's office and understand, wait a minute, are there gaps? Well, if there are gaps, we need to make sure that we get these gaps filled. This is a great instance here, the SHIELD Act, allowing us, again, to fill some of those gaps to make sure that we've got a whole holistic approach to making sure we've got citizens only voting in our elections.
It's just common sense. And my response to the Democrats who are putting up all the fear-mongering red flags about this, it's just incredible. You thought we were asking everybody to run a marathon in order to qualify to vote, as opposed to just pretty simple steps and processes. But it just seems like that they would embrace it because I think that they respond to many on the right who believe that there are election integrity issues. And I'm not here to debate whether or not that has been the case or not. But wouldn't you embrace something that you could say, okay, look, we did this and it didn't really change the outcome, and therefore it kind of nullifies or diminishes the argument that there are election integrity problems. You're just doing this as a safeguard. You would want to do this because it dilutes that argument.
Well, I love it when they talk about democracy, Gerard. And Obviously, we got to have free, clear, free, fair, and clean elections, safe elections that really dictate or show the will of the people. You can't have that without clean voter rolls.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
It is the cornerstone of election integrity, and we should all be thankful for the legislature passing this. And this is a little bit different than the Save America Act. So that is proof of citizenship on the front end. This is proof of citizenship when we catch you or flag that you're a non-citizen or may be a non-citizen to come in and prove the citizenship on that piece. So it's a little bit different from the federal level. I do think this is a good system we've got. I do not argue against the federal system if that's what they want to implement. Again, it's just another step. And look, again, I talk about this all the time. Folks that were in Iwo Jima and folks that traveled across and fought for our freedoms, they didn't have the ability to say, hey, you know what? It's not easy for me to go get a driver's license. It's not easy for me to go get my passport. Well, they went and gave their life. So they didn't take the convenient side of things. They fought and gave us the ability to have freedom.
Good point. So the SHIELD Act, just for those listening, if you're not familiar, that's the state legislation that to some extent mirrors the federal. There are some exceptions, as you indicate, as part of the registration process. But that has passed both chambers, headed to the governor for signature, and that's what we're talking about. But explain to the folks, Mr. Secretary, what the voting registration, how that would change once the SHIELD Act is implemented. Again, just from the perspective, Mr. Secretary, of someone who's never registered to vote before.
Got it. So again, just very, very clear here, they're aimed at the same thing, making sure that only citizens are on our voter rolls. Ours, just the mechanics are a little bit different when you have to prove that piece of citizenship. So let's say somebody comes in to vote in Mississippi, and let's say they do not have a driver's license, but they show up with some other forms of ID as well as a proof of residency, say your utility bill. Well, because those folks are not in the DPS system because they don't have a driver's license, there is no flag that DPS could provide to the circuit clerk's office that says this may not be a citizen. Because that gap is there, now when those people show up and they don't show up in the DPS system, they're going to be checked regardless into the citizenship safe verification system. So again, you're just closing that gap. It's not making it any harder for anybody. We're just applying the same rules of citizenship to everybody across the board. So I think it's really fair and just and the right thing to do. So
under the SHIELD Act, unlike the Federal SAVE Act, one does not have to provide that documentation to register. But once they do register, you're going to check them against the Federal SAVE database. And if it comes back and says this person doesn't appear to be a legal citizen, you're going to notify them, and they just got to come in and prove that they are, and they're good to go. Is that right?
That is the biggest difference. Yes, sir. The point at which you have to prove that citizenship, again, federal law or what they're arguing for, federal side says on the front end, state side, we're going to do it through the process, through the systems that the federal government gives us. Now, I want to be very clear here. The SAVE system, the verification system, has gone through many iterations of increasing the value of that system now. The more data is coming into it. You can check your whole roll as opposed to just one. It's now free to the states. It is incredible what they've done with that since the Trump administration has gotten in place here. So even, by the way, even there are some Democrat secretaries of state who are working with the White House to use the safe verification system because they understand, well, we finally have a system that works. This is a good process. So I want to make sure that people understand that as well. That's a good point. You're right. It has evolved. It's much improved. Also now includes its ability to determine if someone is deceased or not, right? I think there's an integration with that. That's what I didn't have that prior to a little while back. If you can hang with us, we got a break. I want to dig into this Supreme Court case that's really high profile, going to be further, I believe, deliberated this week up there at the Supreme Court. We got Secretary of State Michael Watson on the line with us. Stay with us.
Mississippi.
Here's John and Corey. You're listening to Middays with Gerard here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. On the line with us is Mississippi Secretary of State Michael Watson. So just to kind of close out this discussion of the State Shield Act, which is designed to ensure that only American citizens are on our voter rolls, to those who are already registered, Mr. Secretary, no action on their part. When you, as a Secretary of State, when you run the rolls and process those against the federal SAVE database, if anybody in the state currently registered comes back as in question with respect to their U.S. citizenship, they'll get notified by your office or circuit clerk, election commissioner, who does the notification. And tell us about the rest of that process.
Yeah, so that comes from the circuit clerk. But you're right. Everybody that's on the rolls now with the SHIELD Act, this gives us the ability to run our list yearly.
Yeah.
So I think it's just that set check, which is really important. You know, you maybe you miss one at some point in time.
Yeah.
You catch them on the next year, catch them the year after that. So I will encourage folks, though. This is a great point as well, Gerard. Just in general, it's always important just to make sure that your records are up to speed, up to date. You can go on our website and go to the different tools we have, My Election Day, et cetera, and check your voter roll or voter registration just to make sure everything's up to speed. I think that's really important just to remind folks, just a periodic check every now and then just to make sure. I think that's a good practice.
Yeah. Well, appreciate that. I just wanted people not to freak out and think, oh, my gosh, I got to go prove my citizenship before I vote the next time. If you're currently registered, you're good to go, unless, honestly, on the rare outside chance some anomaly surfaces and you get contacted, and you can easily clean that up. We don't want to disenfranchise anybody. That's not the purpose here.
That's exactly right. Matter of fact, we've seen some false news, fake news, I guess, if you want to call it, here lately from our friends over at Mississippi Today, just really taking a terrible approach to try to explain some of the data that we use to make sure our rolls are up to speed. Ultimately, these are information that's given to our elections commissioners. They're the ones that have to go in to make sure they've gotten proper data to choose someone's address needs to be changed, et cetera, make them inactive. So again, important to remember to go check your roll just periodically to make sure you're up to speed and up to date.
As much as anything, I don't know that we'll find a lot, honestly. I'm not convinced there are a lot of illegals registered to vote in Mississippi, but it's the confidence builder. That's what we're trying to do here, is just give people confidence that their election systems are accurate and that they are administered with the highest level of integrity. That's what we're concerned about. This is just another tool.
Yeah, 100%. And I think sometimes, again, we start to think about these federal elections and say, well, a handful isn't going to change anything. Well, that handful will change a school board election that can raise your taxes. And that handful will change a city council race that will raise your taxes. So everyone counts. I think that's the thing we've got to remember. I
totally agree. Let's turn our attention in the time we have remaining to this big Supreme Court case that the justices are hearing, and that is styled as Watson versus Republican National Committee. So explain to folks why your name is affixed as a plaintiff in this case, because I got a feeling you may not necessarily feel the way that the case is played out with you as the plaintiff, just a hunch on my part. But you as the Secretary of State, you're the one because you administer the elections.
That's right, because I am the chief election officer.
Okay.
My name is attached to that case. And I'm going to go really, really high level here, Gerard.
Okay.
You can get into the nuts and bolts of the case, and I don't need to do that with it pending before the Supreme Court. But clearly you want to look at the definition of election day, and you also want to look at federalism. I think those are the two pieces that are going to swing this decision. If you get to the definition of election day and you understand what it means, then I don't think you get to federalism. If you can figure out you're not sure what election day means, then I think you do get to federalism. So what the Constitution says is what's going to, in my opinion, win the day. And I think it's very important to get this in front of the Supreme Court, because this is a case that can have long-lasting impacts when it comes to elections and the safety thereof, the integrity thereof.
Yeah. Yeah, so what's at stake here is that Mississippi law allows ballots to be considered and counted if they arrive 5 business days, right? Is it 5 days or 5 business days?
Business days,
okay.
So as long as it's 5 business days.
From the election day. As long as they're postmarked, if it came in through the mail right, by the
right.
actual election day.
Postmarked by election day. But again, I think you look at Mississippi's, and that maybe you say, well, that's not too bad. But you look at other states that have 21 days or 15 days, or then you start to think, wait a minute, something's going on here. So I think that's what the Supreme Court's going to try to figure out.
So it looks like they're kind of leaning towards, we're just going to have a hard cutoff on election day. Is kind of where they're leaning. That's what all the reports suggest. Would you agree?
That's what I took from the hearing. I was there.
Okay.
It's just incredible to hear Clarence Thomas and Gorsuch, and unbelievable as a lawyer to sit before the Supreme Court and listen to those ladies and gentlemen question. And it was a good experience. Yeah,
that's cool. Well, we're going to keep an eye on this, but we may know something later this week. You think? We got about 20 seconds left.
We could. It could be. Who knows? Could be soon. Could be later. Yeah. June is the latest.
That's right. Secretary of State Michael Watson has been our guest here on Middays. Appreciate you coming on, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, sir.
You got it. Have a good one.
You too. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. It's Fox News SuperTalk News now.
Your of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth studio. Diplomacy gaining a bit of momentum in the Middle East. The president indicates we're getting ever so closer. That's what he said. He had a lengthy Truth Social post this morning concerning the progress being made in the Middle East. And, man, I'm big time hoping that that is the case and we get some resolution there. Move this thing forward for sure. He says the deal will probably happen sooner rather than later. Actually says deal will be reached sooner, or else he'll blow up Iran, is what he said. He was quite blunt, direct, and firm. The United States of America is in serious discussions with a new and more reasonable regime, said the president, to end our military operations in Iran. Quote, continuing his Truth Social post, great progress has been made, but if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, which it probably will be, and the Hormuz Strait is not immediately, quote, open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island. So he's issued quite the ultimatum there. He said that our country hadn't touched these sites after having previously given an April 6th deadline to Iran. Quote, this will be retribution for our many soldiers and others that Iran has butchered and killed over the old regime's 47-year reign of terror. He's pretty serious, and the markets like what he has to say, at least somewhat. They've been mostly in the green today, though they have crossed the unchanged line a couple of times. The NASDAQ has. I don't think the Dow has been out of the green, but it has been up as much as 400 and change points today, and currently up about 300. So it's pulled back a little bit. 10-year Treasury yield also down. But that's not really looking good if you're thinking about taking out a mortgage, because mortgage rates are still somewhat elevated, tied to the 10-year, as you know. And it's those bond rates that also factor into sentiment on Wall Street with respect to investing in equities. So that's where we are, the financial picture. By the way, speaking of financial picture, big week for the president with respect to the nation's finances, because that's when the Trump administration is expected to submit its annual budget That'll be on Friday. It's the executive office there, the executive branch that is responsible for submitting a proposed budget to the legislature, that being the Congress, but they then have to act on that. They don't have to enact it as submitted. That's that deal, Rhino, as you know. You talk about a procession from the White House over to the Capitol with boxes full of, literally, right, carts to carry these things over. What the heck does that procession look like coming from the Capitol?
Well, considering how the federal government just loves spending money it doesn't have, it's probably a pretty showy affair.
Coming down the mall there from the White House onto the Capitol. Here, have your budget. Oh my gosh! So here's
delivered one page at a time by people wearing jetpacks.
Well,
that's about as efficient as the government gets.
And you know the way that works is it can't be one per page. The jetpacks are necessary so you can move back and forth, right, as you're delivering, because there's just so much room. And if we had one per page, there ain't enough room in the building for that. So I love that. Jetpacks, that's perfect. The budget is expected to include $200 billion or so for the costs related to the Iran war, but then another $500 billion for the military next year. Wow. The Department of War's budget currently sits at just under $1 billion. This would increase it, under $1 trillion. I'm conflating once again the state and the federal. Billion at the state, trillion at the federal. It is expected to come in at about $1.5 trillion for next year. And it looks like we're on track again to generate $200 billion. $2 trillion. Man, I'm struggling with that today. $2 trillion deficits. That's what it's looking like again. And no end in sight to that. Man, I sure do hope that the Congress gets serious about that, but I don't feel real optimistic at this point that will be the case. We already told you about what's going on in the state government, where we've got an increase in the budget there. And it looks like that likely will land on the governor's desk. But that is certainly trending upward with some $255 million more the state expects to spend in fiscal year 2027. Most of that boost is attributed to the increase in the Medicaid program. And I just don't see how Medicaid spending is going to retreat. Quite the opposite. I think it's going to continue to increase. That's going to put significant pressure on our state's finances. And, of course, you know we already talked about giving teachers a $2,000 pay raise. So there's a question on the C Spire text line, Mike in Oxford, any raise for university instructors? Here, I haven't seen the conference report. That was just agreed to. Haven't seen that filed yet, Rhino, on this particular measure. So I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that there were several bills that were filed throughout the session that did include increases for higher ed instructors. But I don't know what this final legislation will look like, which is, of course, going to be captured in the conference report, because that's what happened. We talked about it. There were several measures. They couldn't agree on them. They invited conference. They conferenced over the weekend, came to an agreement, and then the report is filed, and that's what ultimately will be put to a vote. Don't know what is included in that as far as the details yet. So I haven't heard anything about inclusion of the higher ed instructors as part of the $2,000 pay raise for K through 12 teachers. I haven't heard anything about that, so I hesitate to to share something without that direct information. Let's see. William and Brandon says, good morning, gentlemen. My dad passed away. This was earlier in the morning. I guess you got the question of that. I went a little too far back. Hope you got your answer to your question there, William, about your dad passing away and leaving property. That gets kind of complicated. My suggestion, I'm sure you probably already got that because you were talking to the lawyers earlier, is make sure you got some good lawyers to help you out. And, real estate law is pretty complicated. That's a highly specialized area of practice. I play golf every weekend with the guys. Really, really good with real estate. And honestly, Rhino, this is what you think about that being handling closings, which is fairly rudimentary, honestly. Real estate law. You need lawyers involved in that to make sure everything is kosher with law. But this is what normally happens. You get into squabbles, estate squabbles that concern property. And it's complicated. And you need somebody that knows what they're doing there. Mose said, my granddaughter registered to vote last year. She had a real ID and birth certificate but didn't need the latter. So it turns out that in some states, however, Rhino, this is my understanding, they don't verify citizenship to issue a real ID. I think that's right. So you can't, that's where I got into a bit of a spar with some folks on the left who oppose this policy. They're missing the point. So I've personally said, I believe, let me put it this way rather than the negative, when the Secretary of State of Mississippi bounces our voter rolls off the federal SAVE database, I'd be shocked if it reveals there's more than 10 illegals registered. But as the Secretary said, that could be a factor in a school board election. Probably not on a statewide or even a state legislative election, a district election. But I think they're missing the point. It's about instilling and engendering confidence. That's what they're missing. It's confidence. Check that box. I don't have to worry. Maybe something else going on, but it ain't that. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Got a brand new
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's do this.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Let's go.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth studio. I'll just say again that these measures, both at the federal level and now looks like headed for enactment at the state level, just to ensure that when you register to vote, we want to make sure you're an American citizen, that you're qualified and eligible and you possess the right to vote as enumerated in the amendments to the Constitution. I think there are 4 or 5 that dealt with that. One of them I remember is when we lowered the age to 18, allowing black people in this country to vote. I can't remember all the various amendments off the top of my head, but I get it. But every one of those does cite in reference citizens, because non-citizens are not eligible to vote. That's all we're trying to do here. And it's again about instilling confidence more than anything. Just there's been, I think, a significant lack of confidence on election integrity. I think that's safe to say, all because of the COVID crap. Because we went crazy and we were throwing ballots out all over the place and amped up mail-in voting, and that led to more ballot harvesting. And again, it's really dangerous and risky in those states that do all mail-in elections. Now, I don't think those make a big difference at the federal level, because the states where they do that, they're deep blue. The exception being Utah and Nevada. But Utah, reliably red. Nevada, definitely a purple state. Could be an issue there. Could be a factor there. And then this definition of election day that the Supreme Court is trying to sort out, and that concerns the case we were just discussing with the Secretary of State of Mississippi, Watson versus the Republican National Committee. So Republican National Committee and the Mississippi Republican Party, the Libertarian Party of Mississippi, they maintain that the Mississippi law that allows ballots to be counted if they're received 5 days after Election Day, as long as they're postmarked on Election Day, should be disqualified and ruled ineligible for consideration. That's the contention. So what's at stake is the Supreme Court trying to sort out, this is their job, what's Election Day? And that's what you heard the Secretary of State refer to in the short time we had with him. And it turns out that federal law enacted by Congress in 1845 establishes the Tuesday after the first Monday in November as Election Day. In 1872, Congress also directed that congressional elections should occur on that same day. And so that's what this is all about, is what is Election Day, which seems sort of crazy to me. But the U.S. Solicitor General argued on behalf of the Trump administration, filed a friend of the court brief supporting the challengers here. The Solicitor General told the court that Mississippi's theory of election is so general and permissive that it would authorize statutes that Congress could not possibly have approved in the 19th century. Interesting. And they get into the weeds about, well, you know, ballots could be hand-delivered on Election Day, not just sent through the mail. I mean, there are other delivery methodologies where they start getting into all these convoluted nuances regarding Election Day and when a ballot should be considered based on the timing of it being received. So we'll see where that goes. A really fascinating case, but it's the big thing here is you heard the Secretary say he was at the Supreme Court in the gallery there, witnessing, observing the hearing and the testimony and the discussion from the justices. I bet that is pretty cool. It'd be cool for anybody, honestly, but certainly as a lawyer. So the contention is that by the defendants, in this case, that the Mississippi law conflicts with federal laws with respect to this Tuesday after the first Monday in November as, quote, Election Day. Representative Pamela Jayapal, she's calling for reparations for illegals that interacted with ICE. She says that the way that ICE treated them warrants paying them money, is restitution. Wants reparations for illegal immigrants. I'm telling you, the Democrats, absolutely, it seems like it doesn't matter what the issue is. Illegals take priority in everything over American citizens. Doesn't matter. It's some sort of sick, twisted, perverted virtue signaling, look at me sort of deal, I guess. I don't know. But every day you turn around, there's a new story about this. Over there at the Mississippi Today, they're contending that this SHIELD Act that we were just talking to the Secretary about would disenfranchise voters. And they go and found somebody that had some unusual set of circumstances, and they hold that up as typical. That's what kind of drives me crazy, is that, they're just millions of people that experience this. By the way, they also did admit, still got to vote. Maybe a bit of a hassle. Just because of, again, unusual, anomalies, extenuating circumstances. And then you've got, I can't remember who it was exactly, that argued in front of the Congress about the risks, shall we say, of these new requirements to vote. Yeah, it was Republican Senator Murkowski. Hard to believe. She opposes the SAVE Act. Lisa Murkowski. She, she's a Republican, but she frequently breaks ranks with the Republicans on a number of different measures and policy matters. This is one where she stands in front of the Senate, and her staff has prepared her this big map of Alaska, and there's a piece in the southeast corner of Alaska, this part of the state that's attached to it with sort of a narrow strait of land there, and she goes into all these details about how much of an imposition it's going to be, and they're going to have to spend $1,000 to go. Just goes into just incredible detail on this. So their staff, of course, pumped her up with all that stuff. I'm telling you, you would think, again, that you're asking a person who's bedridden to go out and run a marathon. That's the level of difficulty, essentially, she assigns to this. And she also does, you've heard this too, Rhino, what almost all these Democrats are doing, which are deceiving people with this narrative that you're going to have to prove your citizenship on election day to vote. Bring your mountain of documents in tow so that you can vote. And that's categorically false. There's nothing in this legislation that would require that. It requires simple verification. And by the way, they don't have to be hard copy documents. That's the other thing. That was the other thing that I got into the argument with the crazy people on the left. I didn't say anything about documents can be electronic. You don't have to put the word electronic in front of documents. They don't necessarily imply paper. Not in 2025. Yeah, before we had all these digital devices and systems, yeah, that's fair. Today, no. Even, we've talked about this before, you can get your driver's license in the state of Mississippi. I think you can in all states now. There's a mobile driver's license tool. That, by the way, works when you vote. That satisfies the photo ID requirement. Because to get that, you've gone through the process to validate. It's sitting on your phone. This ain't hard. They just try to throw up all these roadblocks, and they're not grounded in fact. I know you're shocked at that, but unfortunately, their trained SEALs get behind that and clap for it. And they eat it up, man. But Murkowski, this was disgusting because in her discussion, she really does make it sound like you're going to have to prove you're a citizen before you're provided a ballot to mark. And that's just not true. You do that by providing the ID that has been obtained because you proved you're a citizen. You do that once for a lifetime of voting. That's the point. Coming right back.
From the Seabrook.com.
Talk Mississippi is with Gerard Gibert.
It is
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Some of y'all never been down south too much. I'm gonna tell you a little story so that you'll understand what I'm talking about. Down there we have a plant that grows out in the woods and the fields. And it looks something like a turnip green. And everybody calls it poke salad. Now that's poke salad. Hut, 2, 3, 4. Hut, 2, 3, 4. Hut, 2, 3, 4. Hut, 2, 3, 4.
That'd be the king there.
Anyway, I used to know a girl lived down there.
Good stuff.
She'd go out evenings and pick her a mess of it, carry it home and cook it for supper.
So,
That's about all they had to eat. But they did all right.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. Our legislature says they may be out of there literally this week. That's what leadership is saying. Speaking of Tupelo, I headed that way Saturday. Rhino, your hometown, the Lee County Republican Party Club there hosted an all-American Trump dinner. It was a lot of fun at one of the buildings there at the Tupelo Furniture Market. And the keynote speaker was David Kustoff. He is a representative from the great state of Tennessee. Did a good job of just recapping what the first year and change has been under the president, accomplishments there. Now, note that I was asked Friday afternoon after the show to be on standby to possibly speak because he was tied up with his duty as a congressman. They weren't sure if they were going to get legislation passed. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was none too happy about the bill the Senate sent over. Gee, I wonder what that procession looked like. He wasn't too happy. I haven't seen him get that fired up since he's been Speaker. And the reason is because they sent a funding bill to fund Department of Homeland Security. That's the remaining piece of government yet to be funded. And, of course, that's what's causing all the angst and the imposition and just the inconvenience and the brutal pain, honestly, to be in line 3-4 hours in the nation's airports because TSA is part of DHS and it has not been funded as a result of not funding the entire DHS package. That's what's causing all the problems. So the House says, the Senate, pardon me, says, we got to get TSA back open. They sent a bill over. However, it omitted funding for ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. Now, it's true that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act did fund some expansion of ICE, but many of the core functions of the unit were not funded, thus the necessity to fund it through the DHS funding package, budgetary package. It did not include this enhanced funding, if you will, that came out of the OBBBA that had to do with border wall and some other assets and resources for the ICE and CBP to discharge their duty. That's why we need this bill to be passed. But the Senate sent it down without funding in there for that, essentially acquiescing to the Democrats. Boy, that made the Speaker mad. And so they then set out to pass legislation that's more to their liking that includes all the above. They did so, voted about 10:30 our time, that's 11:30 Eastern time, Friday evening. And Representative David Kustoff, the featured speaker Saturday night, was at that point thought to be good to go, that he would hop on a plane the next day, travel back to his home in Memphis, and then over to Tupelo Saturday. So glad he made it and was able to fulfill his request to be the keynote speaker. It was an excellent event. The good folks in Tupelo put on, and again, Representative Kustoff did a great job, I thought, of articulating what America is like under this president versus not too long ago, the prior one, and also commented on current affairs with respect to the war in Iran and the DHS funding, which is top of the list, and, of course, the SAVE Act, which we've been talking about this morning. So that was a lot of fun. Appreciate that. Let's see here on the C Spire text line. Adam in Madison says, I want reparations. Hold on, something came across my screen here. I want reparations for the wasted tax dollars paid to the illegals. I hear you, Adam. Touche. No doubt about it. Let's see. Debbie in Hattiesburg says, if the illegals were leaning towards voting Republican, wouldn't the Democrats be ranting about election integrity? They just believe it's a ruse. They don't think. Now, Again, I admit I don't think it's a widespread problem. I think there are challenges to ensure that we have totally solid, true, accurate, accounted for votes. No doubt. I don't think illegals are a big part of that. But again, I just say, just check the box. Let's ensure. Let's make deadgum sure that's not a problem. Get that done. Put it in place. End of discussion. I don't understand why they can't support that. And why they, at least the members of the Congress, both sides, don't support the simple use of a voter ID to vote. Although polls show that many Democrats across the country do. It's like an 80-20 issue, as you hear the Republicans say all the time, yet they don't seem to be able to get on board in the House or the Senate to enact legislation that would require that. And that's what the SAVE Act does, as well as implement some requirements as part of the voter registration process. You heard Secretary of State Michael Watson say that. You bring some documents, and they can be electronic, by the way, to prove that you are an American citizen. Who you are and that you're an American citizen, you're good to go. Simple as that. You don't have to bring those when you vote, just when you register to vote. So that's already been vetted. That's already been determined. That's how you get your ID. And that's how you're on the voter roll. So you show up and you say, I'm so-and-so, here's my ID to prove who I am. And the poll worker says, okay, let me look you up in the system. Yep, you're here. Well, the fact that you're there means you've already proven you're a citizen. It ain't that hard to figure out. That's why when they go out and say, oh, yeah, you got to have all these documents in tow just to vote, it's just a lie. It just is. And it's intended, of course, to just stoke all kinds of crazy hyperbole and a litany of objections is really what it boils down to, that are not grounded in fact whatsoever. Man, oh man. Yeah, Jayapal says we've got to give reparations to families who were traumatized by ICE. Oh my gosh. Just incredible. A little bit about your money. Something I caught over the weekend. You know, there's a couple of analysts who say they think NVIDIA could be worth $20 trillion. $20 trillion in 2030. $20 trillion. It's worth just under 5 today. That's 4x market cap in less than 4 years. I can't even comprehend that. But if you look at their outlook and their guidance coming from Jensen Huang, their CEO, it's pretty dang impressive. And you can see how they could get to $20 trillion market cap. Really, truly is unbelievable. The parents' campaign, by the way, they're not happy about $6 million in tax credits for non-public special purpose schools. Say that they don't have many students, they're already receiving state funding, and that really shouldn't be any tax credits. And the way that works is if you contribute to a fund as an individual taxpayer that's used for that purpose, you get a tax credit from the state of Mississippi. And that's maxed out at a certain level based on law. And so what they want to do is limit that, and they're saying, well, that's what comes up all the time, isn't it, that you hear from mainly people on the left. Well, if we can afford this, well, then we should be able to afford that. They're not linked in that way. One does not necessarily figure into the other the way that they assert. It's just unbelievable. So,
well, in fairness, the parents' campaign's full of midwits. So
it's just unbelievable those positions that they take in that respect. I don't know. When I see the government wanting to give you a tax credit, a limited, of course. I mean, it's not a break the bank situation where it's unlimited. But those who sign up for it and take advantage of those, it's literally first come, first served, issued by the Department of Revenue, approval of those tax credits. When people are willing to reach in their pocket for a purpose like that, and the government says, okay, we'll give you a tax credit off your state income taxes, I don't know. That feels like or your state property taxes as well. Win-win situation to me. Coming right back, final segment.
Polyupa, Mississippi.
Are we going to do this? Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Keep rolling. 3, 2, 1.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. Middays from the Element Well studio. Final segment today. Also, we're going to be doing a remote coming up. Do we have tickets to give away today? Did I think about that? I ran off and left my live reads this morning, so I can't remember. We may have to double up tomorrow.
Yeah, we got some. We can give them away real quick.
Okay, do it.
Yeah, we got one of the best-selling rock groups of all time, the Doobie Brothers, coming to Brandon later this year on the 14th of October, and you don't want to miss it. Tickets for the show are on sale now at the Brandon Amphitheater box office or at Ticketmaster.com. But we're giving you a chance to win a free pair of tickets right at the last second. All you got to do is be the 10th person to text the words, "What a Fool Believes."
There you go.
Be the 10th person to text "What a Fool Believes" to the C Spire text line. That's 601-879-4395. And you'll win a pair of tickets to see the Doobie Brothers October 14th at the Brandon Amphitheater.
And I'm going to be at the Trade Mart in Jackson on Wednesday for the Skills USA competition. This competition features students who compete in different skill-based areas, including welding, carpentry, and masonry. This event is hosted by Build Mississippi. For more information, go to buildmississippi.com. So there you go. Looking forward to that event. Didn't get to it today, but I will tomorrow. Lots of talk finally starting to bubble up about Social Security, with it barreling towards insolvency, and some ideas being floated of how to address that. And like I've said so many times, real simple: more coming in, less going out, combination of the two. And that, most of the proposals, that's exactly what they look like, a combination of the two. Here at home with the Public Employees Retirement System, looks like that we got some reforms to the Tier 5 layer that was enacted last year in an effort to shore up the system's finances. And there are some things that many people found objectionable, such as the 35 years required of service to retire at any age. That's been pulled back to 30. That made it through. And also new return-to-work provisions that would allow one to return to work after being out for 30 days instead of 90 and earn up to 80% of the pay instead of less than half of the pay for a position under the old rules. So, but still, though, that doesn't solve the fundamental problem, which is that the program has a major unfunded liability. And so what we're really doing here is reversing some of the measures that were designed to improve the system's finances. I'm anxious to see what lawmakers' next move is, because this is a short-term, little small fix that is designed really to eliminate many of the concerns expressed by people across the state government, workers and employers of those workers, with respect to the Tier 5 program. So, man, oh man, we're seeing more and more movement in the country to prohibit the construction of data centers. I think this is a huge mistake. I think that data centers can be constructed and established in a way that there are no harms to people no increase in power, no depletion of water, no use of agricultural land, and all the other things no pollution, no noise, all the things that people are expressing their objections. But it turns out that there is a movement going on, like I said, and it's being led in the federal government by none other than Bernie Sanders and AOC. But their objection is different. They want you to believe it's because they're concerned about the environmental impact and the impact on the cost of electricity, et cetera. Really what they're mad about is they don't want people making money. I just told you about NVIDIA, expected to be a $20 trillion company. That's because of this massive demand for their technology and their guidance and outlook there too. You know that fundamentally AOC and Bernie Sanders and that wing of the Democratic Party, they hate profit. They hate free enterprise, honestly. And we saw these No Kings protests across the country. Don't know that I've ever seen so many communists assembled in the United States. They're pretty despicable. But, man, there's just all kinds of reports from other parts of the country as well. Haven't seen too strong here protest against data centers, but there certainly are people that here's one in Tulsa. They're complaining about a suburb of Tulsa called Spring, Oklahoma. Pardon me. It's that's not Spring. It's the Project Spring. Yeah, that's what I got right. So Project Spring, that's Google's project. They're trying to locate in a suburb of Tulsa, and the people are showing up saying they're all mad about it. Man, oh, man. We're out of here. Back with you tomorrow. Stay safe, and God bless.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.